Did you know that in order to keep an adult audience awake and attentive and engaged, you as a presenter or a teacher need to do something every 7 minutes to either change the energy or kind of wake them up? And the good news is that doesn't mean that you have to do a dance or sing a song or be a huge entertainer. It's not what that takes. It's something simple, but it just basically captures their attention and awakens their mind a little bit so that they just don't go to sleep, really. If they need to sleep, that's okay. We totally understand. But we want to be engaging. We want to make it enjoyable for them to be there and make it worth their time to invest being in our class and learning something, getting something out of it. So we help them by putting some effort into things that will engage their mind and keep them alert and awake. If you go to churchofjesuschrist.org, you can find a lot of great suggestions under the Serve and Teach tab. They also have suggestions in the manuals for primary, for teenagers in Sunday school, and even some in Come Follow Me. But you also probably know that if you're teaching from the general conference talks, that you're not going to get a lot of activity or energizing suggestions for this 7-minute method. So I'll just discuss a few. I'm Elizabeth, and welcome to Hearken and Heed. So today, one of the things we're going to talk about is questions, and not a lot because I did an entirely different video just on questions. So I recommend that you go watch that if you want some help with questions. Questions are probably one of the most used and most effective ways in our church setting to be able to shift the energy and to keep people alert and awake. Especially if you call on someone specifically. They will definitely be awake. But be prayerful and careful about who you choose to call on and make sure that they're comfortable responding, right? All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on questions. Music is a fantastic tool, and it is amazing. It's powerful. As you probably already know, music can bring the spirit more quickly and more powerfully than almost anything else. And there's lots of different ways you can use music. You can have them sing a song, just sing a hymn or a primary song. Make sure that you provide the words for them or the full music with the notes so that nobody feels awkward because they don't have it memorized or they don't know or they can't remember. So that's one option. Another option, of course, is you could have somebody perform. You could invite somebody from the ward or maybe a couple primary children. There's a lot of different options, but invite somebody to perform a musical number. And another option is to just play a song that relates to the message. All of this should add to the message you're giving, to the principles being taught. It's not just fluff, it's not just to fill the time. It needs to have a purpose and it needs to enhance what you're already doing. But music is incredibly powerful. All right, the one that gets used the most is having people read aloud. And you know this, right? Open up your scriptures and read this, and who wants to read, right? We've all been there, and we've been there a lot. And it is an effective tool, but it does get overused. So be careful about using it too much. We kind of tend to default as teachers and get in a rut, just what everybody else is doing or what we typically do. So don't be afraid to try some different things. Another option is to ask people ahead of time to read the story or to read part of what you're teaching and then have them retell it briefly, but make sure you set a time limit on that if you do. You can also do discussion groups. Now again, you would want to set a time limit for discussion groups. These can be really big, like you could hand out something and divide the room into 3 sections or 2 sections, or they could be small. You might just have people sitting next to each other discuss it between themselves, right? So that everybody just gets a quick little discussion. But that will definitely keep them engaged and active. Smaller groups I think are a little better, but bigger groups can work if you don't have a lot to do. Another thing that you can do that isn't necessarily a discussion group, but it does engage the mind and put them to work, is you give them an activity to do on their own with a pen and a paper, or maybe in their scriptures or in the talk itself, but get them writing. Having them think and write is a great activity, and not only does it keep them awake and alert, but it helps them remember what you're teaching, remember the principles that are being taught, and helps them apply it to themselves. So that's another great tool. Games can be a lot of fun, and of course if you're teaching young children or teenagers, hands down, that's a great one to go to. When we're working with adults and teaching adults, we maybe don't incorporate games quite as much because we don't want the games, again, to detract from all the great content and material, all the principles and the doctrines that we have to discuss and that are really so good. Honestly, I rarely use games because I feel like every single talk is so full of spiritual treasures, like President Nelson would say, that there isn't a need to play games for them. The content itself is just so fabulous. So I don't particularly use games a lot, but there might be a time when it's appropriate and when it would be great. One thing to be careful about with games is if you come from a family like mine, there can be some pretty big, competition and some contention. We don't get too heated, but it can happen on occasion. And that can happen in your classes as well. So you want to make sure you pick a game that you can manage so it doesn't get too intense, that it can still stay fun, but really focuses on the principles. And then visuals. Now you notice I have this written in all caps. The reason I have this written in all capital letters is because every time I teach, I strive to include questions and visuals no matter what. All these other things are extras, but questions, good questions, and good visuals are key. Visuals can be anything from writing on the board like this. You could bring something to use as a, object lesson or just something to look at. Sometimes I know Relief Society gets mocked about having the table set and having the picture out, but it's a good visual because even if somebody isn't quite engaging with what's being said, they can look at what you have displayed and it can remind them of the topic. It can get them pondering all on their own. So I definitely recommend a visual. And I've done everything from Legos to, actually one time we'll probably talk about this with one of these talks, but I had them write down something they wanted to get rid of, something that was distracting them, which is common for all of us. And we wrote it all on paper, we crushed them all up, we stuck them in a bowl, and then poured syrup all over them, and then asked who wanted theirs back. Now, that's an object lesson, but it's also a visual. And there are a lot of resources to find those online, in the text, in the manuals. They're all over the place. But I would suggest to you that the very best resource you have for deciding what sort of activities and what sort of things you incorporate into your lesson is the Holy Ghost. I promise that as you are prayerful about what you can include and how you can teach the principle, the Lord will direct you and guide you. Sometimes that direction comes as you're preparing and it's clear and it's obvious. Other times it comes right before you're ready to teach. I've had it come just before I leave the house. The thought comes, go grab this. So I run and grab it, and sure enough, that's exactly what I needed to show or do during the lesson. Other times I have been writing on the board and something comes to me and it's like it just comes out of my hand and I didn't even plan it, but it's perfect. So be prayerful as you prepare and be specific about asking the Lord what you can add to your lesson that will enhance it and help those you are teaching understand and better apply the principles and the gospel in their lives.